The night Corinne Banks put a man on the floor, she was thinking about 17 missing receipts. That was the detail that stayed with Pipel afterward. Not that she had done it. Not that she had done it so cleanly, but that the moment he crashed onto the Ivory Club's imported marble, her first thought had apparently been for the folder she'd dropped. The papers had scattered in a wide arc across the floor, expense records and vendor invoices fanning out like a drop deck of cards. And Corinne had stared at them with visible distress, while the man who had grabbed her wrist groaned 6 feet away. She had come downstairs from the accounting office because the kitchen manager needed a signature on a supply order before 9. That was the entire errand. 45 seconds, maybe a minute. She had worn her reading glasses down because she hadn't bothered taking them off, and she was holding the folder against her chest, the way she always did. Arms crossed over it, head slightly down, moving through the main dining room, the way she always moved through the main dining room, quickly and close to the wall, trying to occupy as little space as possible. Randall Bird had made that impossible. He was one of the club's longest-standing members. The kind of member the front-of-house staff described to each other in the break room, using a specific tone of voice that didn't require further explanation. He was wealthy in a way that had calcified into assumption, the assumption being that whatever he wanted arranged itself accordingly. He had said something to Corinne as she passed his table. She had answered briefly and kept walking. He had said something else. She had not answered at all. Then his hand closed around her wrist. "I'm still talking to you." She had stopped, not because she froze. Corinne Banks did not freeze, but because her aunt had been specific about this. Don't fight the grip immediately. Feel it first. Locate the weak point. "Please let go," she said. He didn't. She turned toward the opening in his grip, shifted her weight low, all 186 pounds of it, suddenly deliberate and grounded, and redirected his balance forward with one clean pivot. Randall Bird hit the marble floor with the kind of sound that made every person in the dining room look up at exactly the same moment. The folder went one direction. Corinne went another. She didn't look back at him. She put 3 steps between them and stopped and stood still, breathing steadily, while the dining room held its collective breath around her. In a semi-private booth along the far wall, separated from the main room by an etched-glassed partition, a man sat without moving. He had been in conversation with 2 associates when the sound happened. The conversation had stopped. The associates had turned to look. He had not. He already knew what he would see. Theron Vale watched Corinne Banks stand alone in the stunned silence, her reading glasses slightly crooked, her folder empty on the floor, and something shifted in his expression. Not much. The people who knew him well would have called it significant anyway. The smile lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then it was gone, and he reached for his water glass and said something quiet to Luke, who had already risen from his chair. The room found its voice all at once. Several guests pushed back from their tables. 2 servers hovered uncertainly at the edge of the dining floor. Randall had pulled himself upright against a chair, face flushed dark red, his composure destroyed far more thoroughly than anything else. "She assaulted me." His voice was loud enough to carry to the kitchen. "I want management. I want security. I want—" "You were holding her wrist." The comment came from a woman at the nearest table, delivered quietly, with the tone of someone stating an obvious fact. "That is completely irrelevant to." "She asked you to let go." Same woman, still quiet. Randall turned his volume up higher, as if that might retroactively change what had happened. "Do you have any idea what kind of legal exposure this establishment now has? Do you have any idea who I am?" Corinne, still standing where she had stopped, looked at the papers scattered across the floor. She looked at them for a long moment with an expression that was difficult to read. until a server near the service station recognized it as genuine worry. Corinne. The server, a young woman named Una, stepped toward her. "Are you okay?" "I need to get those back in order," Corinne said, voice low. "The supply order has to be signed before 9. If the kitchen manager doesn't get it by 9, the produce delivery reroutes to the warehouse and then it takes 3 days to." Una stared at her. "You just—" "I know." Corinne pushed her glasses straight. "But the papers." Una looked at the papers. She looked at Randall Bird, who was still announcing his legal intentions to no one in particular. She looked back at Corinne. "I'll get them," she said. "They have to be in the right order. Invoices first, then." Corinne. "Right. Okay." Una collected the scattered pages with quiet efficiency, while Corinne stood and tried to look less like she was doing math in her head. She was, in fact, doing math in her head, specifically calculating whether the folder had hit the marble hard enough to crease the copy of the vendor contract she needed for her files. It had taken her 40 minutes to format that contract. Several feet away, a dishwasher, who had been carrying a bus tub through the back corridor, had watched the entire incident through the service window. He reappeared in the doorway, surveyed the scene, and announced in a carrying voice, "Gravity works different for some people, I guess." 3 servers burst into muffled laughter. Even the sommelier, who prided herself on imperviousness to everything, pressed her lips together very hard. Corinne almost smiled, almost. Luke returned to the booth and set his phone face down on the table. "Management says the member is threatening civil action." Theron Vale lifted his water glass. "Set it down. The surveillance system. All cameras active. Dining room, entrance corridor, private hallway. I want copies. Full resolution, all angles, time-stamped." Luke paused. "Before or after management reviews them?" "Before." Luke nodded once and stood again. Theron's remaining associate leaned forward slightly. "Is this something we need to be concerned about?" "No." Theron's eyes moved briefly to the service station, where Corinne was now carefully inspecting each page Una had gathered, checking their order with methodical attention, as if a man hadn't just hit the floor because of her, as if the room weren't still buzzing with competing versions of what had happened. "She didn't pursue," Theron said quietly, more to himself than to his associate. "I'm sorry." When he went down, she moved away. She didn't follow. He set down his glass. Most people either freeze or overcorrect. She did neither. His associate had worked with Theron Vale for 11 years. He recognized the particular quality of attention his employer was now directing at a club accountant in a cardigan, and he said nothing further. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They spoke with Randall, who grew more theatrical with each retelling. They spoke with Corinne, who said only that she had asked to be released and had not been, that she had created enough space to leave, and that she had then left. She answered every question in the same measured voice. She did not elaborate. She did not apologize. She did not perform distress. The officer who conducted her interview found himself nodding more than he had expected to. Before she left, he said, "You stopped the moment you were clear." Corinne looked at him. "Yes. You didn't go after him." "Why would I?" she said, with what seemed like genuine confusion. "I just wanted to get past him." By the time Prudence Manning, the club's general manager, emerged from her office, the police were wrapping up and the dining room was settling back into a performance of normalcy that satisfied no one. Prudence was a meticulous woman who had managed prestigious establishments for 20 years and had survived everything from health department citations to a sitting congressman's public meltdown over an overcooked entree. She looked at Corinne with the particular expression of someone who has a problem and is currently deciding which category to file it under. "Miss Banks." Corinne straightened. "Miss Manning." "My office," tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Of course. A pause. Should I bring the supply order? Because the kitchen manager still needs. The supply order can wait. The produce delivery really can't. 8 o'clock, Miss Banks. Prudence walked away. A bartender at the far end muttered something under his breath that made Una press her mouth together again. Corinne looked at the folder in her hands. Then she went and found the kitchen manager herself, got the signature, and submitted the order with 4 minutes to spare. That night, sitting in her car in the staff parking lot with the engine off and the windows fogging slightly from the cold, Corinne looked at her wrist. The marks from Randall Bird's grip had gone from red to something more persistent. She pressed her thumb along the edge of one and felt the faint ache of it, and she thought, as she always thought when her body reminded her of something, about her Aunt Darlene. Darlene Banks had hands that looked like they could bend rebar. 30 years as a military police officer, then a decade of private security consulting, and she still kept the calluses. She had been the one to insist, when Corinne was 19 and had come home from her second semester at college, looking quieter than she'd left, that there were things worth knowing. She hadn't asked what happened. She had just said, one afternoon in her garage in Austin, "I'm going to show you something. You don't have to use it, but I want you to have it." "I'm not coordinated," Corinne had said. "This isn't about coordination." Darlene had wrapped one hand around Corinne's wrist, firm enough that she couldn't pull free. "It's about geometry. Your body weight is an asset. Use it." Corinne had gestured vaguely at herself. "I know." Darlene's voice had been entirely matter-of-fact. "That's what I said, asset." They had practiced the same sequence for 3 months. Wrist grip, release, pivot, redirect, release, pivot, redirect. Over and over until Corinne could do it without thinking. Until the geometry of it lived in her body rather than her memory. Until it wasn't a technique so much as a reflex she hadn't known she was building. At the end of the 3rd month, Darlene had looked at her and said, "The goal is never to win. The goal is to walk away. And if I can't walk away, then you make enough space too." A pause, her aunt's eyes steady and certain. "You understand the difference?" Corinne had nodded. At 19, she hadn't been entirely sure she did. She understood it now. She sat in the parking lot until her breathing was fully even. Then she drove home, and she cried once, briefly in the shower, and then she stopped. The meeting with Prudence the next morning lasted 11 minutes. Temporary suspension, pending internal investigation. Club policy required neutral review before any employment action could be taken or not taken. The legal department was already in contact with Mr. Bird's attorneys. The situation was, Prudence paused here, choosing words with visible care. Complex. "I understand," Corinne said. "This isn't a judgment on your character." "I know. It's a procedural." "Miss Manning." Corinne folded her hands in her lap. "I understand. I'll wait to hear from you." A brief silence settled over the office. "Is there anything you need before you go?" Corinne thought about it. "The accounts receivable file for October is on my desk. The third-party auditor is expecting it by Thursday. Someone should probably. I'll assign it. It needs to be done in a specific order, or the columns won't reconcile. I can leave notes." Prudence Manning looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely control. "Yes," she said finally. "Leave notes." Corinne left very detailed notes. She color-coded them. The clip appeared online that afternoon. Someone's phone footage, roughly 14 seconds, beginning at the moment Randall went down. It had no context. It had no lead-up. What it had was clarity. A heavy-set woman in an office cardigan and reading glasses, and a man crashing to the floor, and the woman turning away. Without the 4 minutes that preceded it, it looked like exactly what Randall Bird's representatives were already calling it. By evening, It had been viewed enough times to matter. Corinne saw it at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her. She watched it twice. Then she closed the tab and sat with her hands flat on the table, very still. She had done nothing wrong. She knew that with a certainty that sat at the bottom of her chest, like ballast. It didn't make the clip any easier to watch. Luke had anticipated most of this. He set the secured tablet in front of Theron the following morning with a single page of summary. 3 camera angles, combined runtime 41 minutes, full resolution, chain of custody documented. Theron reviewed the footage with his office door closed. He watched Corinne pass Randall's table the first time. Randall had flagged her down. She had answered briefly and disengaged with professional courtesy. He watched the second pass. He watched Randall's hand move. He watched Corinne's expression register exactly what was happening. He watched her ask once to be released. He watched Randall's response. He watched the pivot. He watched her walk 3 steps and stop and stand still, and he watched her face in the aftermath. Not frightened, not triumphant, genuinely and visibly preoccupied with the papers on the floor. He watched the whole sequence 3 times. Then he called a number that was not in most contact lists and said very little, because the situation required very little to be said. There was something else, however, something Luke had discovered through the kind of thoroughness that Theron paid him specifically to apply. 8 months of careful, unsolicited documentation, a file on Corinne's office desk clearly labeled, that contained what 3 consecutive quarterly audits had entirely missed: consistent, deliberate anomalies in the club's membership billing, organized in a format that made the pattern immediately legible to anyone who looked. She had not been asked to compile it. She had not told anyone about it. She had simply seen that the numbers were wrong and had spent 8 months recording exactly how wrong and in which direction, because she apparently could not stop seeing a problem without building a record of it. Luke delivered the file to the appropriate federal contacts through channels that left no visible fingerprints. The formal review convened 4 days after the incident. Club management, corporate representatives, 2 attorneys, and, near the back of the room, a man no one had introduced who had arrived with quiet authority and stayed that way. The footage played in sequence, all 3 angles, full duration. The room was quiet for a long time afterward. One of the corporate attorneys turned to Randall Bird with the expression of someone whose morning has taken a turn they had not planned for. "Mr. Bird," she said carefully, "you'd like to walk us through your account again?" Randall opened his mouth, closed it. She waited. "The footage," he said finally, "doesn't capture the full context." "The footage," she said, "captures 6.5 minutes of context prior to the incident." The room went quiet again, the specific quiet of a truth that has nowhere left to hide. Within the hour, 2 men in ordinary clothes were waiting in the lobby for Randall Bird, not because of the dining room incident, because 8 months of financial documentation had arrived in the right hands with enough precision to make what came next unavoidable. The outcome of the formal review was, by contrast, uncomplicated. Corinne Banks had acted in self-defense. She would face no employment consequences. Prudence delivered this news with her usual precision. "Your position remains unchanged. You may return Monday." "Thank you." A pause. "Did anyone water the plant in the second-floor conference room? I usually do that on Tuesdays, and I've been out." Prudence stared at her. "It's a peace lily," Corinne said. "They're sensitive." "I'll look into it," Prudence said, in the voice of a woman who had not expected her Monday to include this sentence. 3 days after the review, a message arrived asking Corinne to meet with the club's new ownership representative at 2 o'clock on Friday. She had not known the club had a new ownership representative. She had not known the club had changed hands at all. She searched her files to confirm she had not somehow missed this information, found nothing, and concluded she had simply not been told. She arrived at 2 o'clock with a notepad, because she always took notes in meetings she hadn't been briefed on. Theron Vale was already there. He stood when she entered, a small gesture that caught her off guard, and indicated the chair across from him. "Miss Banks." She sat. She looked at him for a moment, this man she had seen only through glass, and noted that he was watching her with an attention that didn't feel aggressive. It felt like he was waiting to see what she would do next. "You were there," she said, "that night." "Yes." "You saw all of it." "Yes." She nodded once slowly. "And now you own the club. A company I hold a stake in completed the acquisition." "Yes." He set a folder on the table. "That's not the primary reason I asked to meet with you." She looked at the folder but didn't reach for it. "What is?" "I've reviewed the financial documentation you compiled on the account. Irregularities." A beat. "That was a personal project. I wasn't authorized to." "You weren't assigned it," he said. "That's a different thing entirely." She considered that. "You found discrepancies that 3 consecutive quarterly audits missed," he continued. "You documented them over 8 months. You organized them in a format that was immediately useful to investigators. You did this without being asked, without telling anyone, and without any expectation that anyone would ever look at it." "The numbers were wrong," she said. "I couldn't stop seeing that they were wrong." Something in his expression shifted in the way that the people who knew him had learned to recognize as significant. He opened the folder. "I hold interests in 17 business entities across 6 states. 6 of them are hospitality operations, restaurants, event venues, 2 hotels. My current compliance infrastructure is," he paused, "adequate." She waited. "I want to change that. I'd like you to consider a senior financial compliance role, full scope, all 6 operations." Corinne looked at him for a long moment. "I'm a bookkeeper at a private dining club. You're someone who saw what 3 professional auditors missed and organized it clearly enough for federal investigators to act within 24 hours. He closed the folder. "Title and compensation are negotiable. The role is not. I made the decision before this meeting. You decided before asking me. I had a strong suspicion you were the right person. I wanted to confirm it." She looked at the folder, then at him. "I have a condition," she said. He sat back slightly. "I'm listening. Every employee across your hospitality operations, servers, bartenders, housekeeping, kitchen staff, valets, every single one, gets access to professional self-defense training, not fighting." She was precise about this. Escaping. Getting out of situations they can't talk their way out of. On company time, company-funded, available to anyone who wants it. The room was quiet. "My aunt spent 30 years teaching people that their bodies are tools, not liabilities," Corinne said. "She taught me that when I was 19, and I've thought about it every day since. People who work the floor of a restaurant or the rooms of a hotel are alone in close quarters with strangers all night long. And the only thing anyone ever gives them is call a manager." She stopped. A manager isn't always there in time. Theron Vale was quiet for a moment. "Done," he said. She blinked. "Just like that." "I made that decision before this meeting as well." A faint something entered his voice. "I was hoping you'd ask." Corinne opened her mouth, closed it. "You already knew what I'd." "You were worried about 17 receipts after putting a man on the floor." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully name yet. "You think about everyone around you before you think about yourself." I noticed. She pressed her lips together. "People keep bringing that up. I expect they will for some time." She looked at the folder again. The thing was, she was already running numbers in her head. 6 entities, probably a combined employee base of somewhere between 400 and 600 people. Training program logistics, vendor sourcing, compliance documentation infrastructure. Her notepad was open in her lap, and she hadn't even noticed reaching for it. She looked up to find him watching her, with what she could only describe, despite everything, as patience. "Okay," she said. "Yes." The training program launched 5 months later across all 6 properties. Darlene Banks, who had semi-retired to a house outside Austin, and received the phone call with a very long silence before saying, "Well, it's about time someone did this right," came on as lead instructor for the first 3 months and built the curriculum that would outlast her involvement. They held sessions in whatever large space was available, hotel ballrooms before morning setup, restaurant dining rooms after closing, event venue floors between bookings. No one was required to attend. Nearly everyone did anyway. The sessions started the same way every time. Corinne, standing without a podium, saying quietly, "I'm not here because I'm brave. I'm here because I was scared once, and someone had taught me what to do before I needed it." That honesty carried in a way that prepared remarks never did. People came back for the second session, and the third. Word spread to sister properties. Other companies in the industry started asking questions. A reporter wrote a piece. A larger piece followed. Through all of it, Theron Vale's name appeared on no public documentation connected to the program. He had structured it that way deliberately. Corinne had structured it that way for different reasons. She wasn't interested in the story being about ownership. She was interested in the story being about the room. He came to many sessions anyway, not to speak. He stood near the back and watched, and asked careful questions after everyone else had gone, and listened to her answers with the specific quality of attention she had come to recognize as his natural mode. He rarely interrupted. He preferred to observe and then ask exactly the right question, which she was beginning to find slightly unnerving in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. One evening in late autumn, after a session at one of the hotel properties, he walked her to her car through a courtyard that smelled of cold air and late-blooming rosemary, and stopped walking without apparent reason and said her name. She turned. "I've worked with a great many people," he said. "Some of them powerful, some of them brilliant. Very few of them genuinely good in the way that doesn't require an audience." He paused. "You've changed how I think about what the work is for." She waited. "I wanted you to know that." His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it she recognized as the particular quiet of a person being more honest than they're accustomed to being. "Theron," she said. She almost never used his first name. It landed between them with a certain weight. "Yes. I've been running numbers on the December staffing projections, and I think you're going to have a gap in the third quarter estimates that's going to." He laughed. It was not the response she had expected. It was low and genuine, and it changed the entire geometry of his face. And Corinne Banks stood in the dark courtyard with cold air moving around them, and felt something in her chest go very still and then very warm. "You're doing it right now," he said. "You're worried about the staffing gap. The numbers are actually quite—" "I know." He was still smiling. A thing she had learned was rarer and more significant than it looked on most people. "We'll fix the numbers." He was looking at her with an expression she had not permitted herself to fully register before. Because letting herself fully register, it had seemed like a mistake. The category of person she believed herself to be was not entitled to make. It did not seem like a mistake now. "Okay," she said quietly. He reached over and covered her hand with his. Nothing more than that, a hand over a hand and in a dark courtyard, and the city went on around them, entirely unaware of the particular stillness happening in one small corner of it. 18 months after the night, Corinne Banks put Randall Bird on the marble floor of the Ivory Club. She stood in the ballroom of one of Theron's hotel properties and watched 423 employees fill a room that felt, improbably, like a celebration. The program had reached every property. Every new hire completed orientation. The wait list for the advanced sessions ran 3 months. 6 other hospitality companies had adopted versions of the framework. A state legislator had cited it in a floor speech on workplace safety. Darlene had been interviewed about it twice and had said both times that her niece deserved the credit. And Corinne had called her afterward and said that wasn't accurate. And Darlene had said, "Corinne, learn to take a compliment," and hung up before she could argue. A young woman, 22, maybe 3 months on the job, found Corinne near the edge of the room and said, "Can I tell you something?" Of course. I watched the video when everything happened. Before I worked here. She paused, pulling the words into order. "I've always been bigger, and I always thought that if something happened to me, I wouldn't be able to." She gestured vaguely at herself, the way Corinne remembered gesturing at 19, because of how I look. "Yes," Corinne said, simply without performance, because she knew exactly what the gesture meant. The training changed that. The way they explained that weight is useful. I had never once thought of it as something useful. A pause. I just wanted to say thank you. Corinne held her gaze for a moment. She thought about a garage in Austin and her aunt's matter-of-fact voice, and the word asset used the way it was meant to be used. "My aunt would want you to tell her that directly," she said. "She's somewhere near the dessert table. She has extremely strong opinions about petit fours." The young woman laughed and went to find her. Theron appeared at Corinne's shoulder, quiet as always. He had a way of moving through rooms that she had stopped trying to fully explain. "You should have said it was you too," he said. "Darlene built the curriculum. You built the room." He looked at the 423 people filling it. "There's a difference." She didn't argue. She had learned, over time, to distinguish between when he was saying a true thing and when he was saying a convenient one. He was quiet for a moment beside her. Then, the December staffing gap. "Resolved," she said. "I reallocated from the spring projections and cross-referenced the—" "I know." His hand found hers at her side, without ceremony or announcement, the way familiar things happened between people who had stopped needing to make them significant. "I looked at your notes." She looked up at him. "You color-coded them," he said. "I color-code everything." "I know." And there it was again, that particular thing in his voice that she had stopped pretending not to recognize. "I've come to rely on it." The ballroom moved and hummed and laughed around them. 423 people who knew now that their weight was not a liability, that the goal was never to win, that the entire point was to walk away, and that someone had thought it worth building an entire system around that idea. Because one night, in a marble-floored dining room, a woman with a folder of receipts had proved it true. Corinne Banks stood in the middle of all of it and thought, this is what the work is for. Then she squeezed Theron Vale's hand and went to make sure her aunt hadn't taken over the entire dessert station, because Darlene had very high standards, and someone, as always, had to.